probably tell from your handout, we're looking at Esther chapter 6 and 7 tonight. You might wonder why I always say that when it's obvious, but we have people who tune in online, so I like to tell them what we're looking at and where we're going in our study in case they're not able to keep up with us. Question number 1 on your handout, of course, think about a question. Has to do with one of the guys we've studied about in the book of Esther. We'll continue to study about him tonight. But what do you guys think of somebody who I've got on here, toots their own horn, but is a braggadocious kind of person?
Not arrogant.
Okay? Think they're arrogant?
I just kind of thought if they tooted their own horn, it didn't really happen.
Okay. You wonder how much is true and how much is not? Yeah, that's sometimes you do, don't you? Go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. If you got to tell someone how great you are, evidently you're not that great.
Yeah, and I think that's probably our general, as humans, that's kind of our general feelings whenever, somebody either, brag about how much money they have or, how big their house is, or, it could be any number of things, how many cars they have, what good a job they have, things like that. But why do you think people do that? A lack of self-confidence. Okay, that could be.
It helps hide other things in their life.
Okay, yeah, I think part of it is sometimes they're afraid maybe their true character or nature would come out, and so they try to, say or do things that'll make people think differently of them than what they really are. Anything else come to mind?
Sometimes they just want attention.
Yeah, I think some people like that do. They crave the spotlight, don't they? They crave attention. But I think a lot of people, again, kind of do that too. And I think generally speaking, what Cindy said is true too. You meet a person like that, it's kind of hard to sort through what to believe and what not to believe. And I think they want to appear maybe more than what they are in the eyes of people. And when you read about through the book of Esther, there was a guy who fits that description. Can you guess who it was? Yeah, Haman, right? And when you go back into chapter 5, I just want to bring this up again because we didn't really spend a lot of time on it last week when we looked at it. But in chapter 5, you read there in verse 10, he sends and he calls for his friends and for his wife. And then verse 11, it says, Then Haman told of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared tomorrow, and I am again invited by her along with the king. The fact that he calls all of his family and all of his friends and his wife together, and he talks about, man, I got a lot of money, and look at my children, look at all these great children that I have, and I've been promoted. Yeah, I've been promoted above every servant and every official in the kingdom of Persia. And then he says, tomorrow I've got a dinner date with the king and the queen themselves. Nobody else is invited. Just me and the king and the queen. But he was a guy, and a lot of people are like that in the world today. He's a guy who wanted to put on this outward appearance that he was really somebody, wasn't he? That he was really an important person when it came to the standards of this world. And that's not uncommon. But frankly, when I run into those type of people, they really irritate me. And sometimes I just want to go over in the corner and gag myself and throw up after I talk to them. But that's the type of guy that Haman was. So let's talk about chapter 6 here. And that comes into play in this story because it plays an important role in really the destiny of Haman and also in what happens to the Jew that we're reading about here by the name of Mordecai. So, question number 2, you read about King Xerxes here, can't sleep, right? So what does he do when he can't sleep at night in this particular instance? Anybody have insomnia here? Know what insomnia is?
Yes.
Okay. I saw some faces out there like, what? How do you deal with it?
You had a servant read to him.
Okay. That's how he dealt with it. And think about it from this way, too. I mean, there's different ways that you can deal with it. Generally, what works best for me is try to find the most boring thing that you can do, and hopefully you fall asleep. And you think about the king, what are some things that he could have done to deal with insomnia? Well, I mean, he could have called, somebody up from his harem and dealt with them that way. He could have called a musician in, could have called a singer in, could have called a court jester in. But it's kind of unique here that what he chose was for somebody to come in and to read to him from the Chronicles of the Kings. Now, what are the Chronicles of the Kings?
History, things they've done.
Yeah, they're the history of the kings of Persia that he's having read to him here. And they're important events and things that have happened and things that they've done, things that have happened to them, things that they have done, accomplishments. We might even say that they've been able to do while they were within office. If I was thinking about what's something that would put me to sleep, that probably the Chronicles of the Kings would probably come in pretty handy, I would think. But I don't know that he was necessarily trying to, or having this read to him to try to put him to sleep, because we've already talked about what kind of guy he was, right? Which king was he having read about?
Mordecai.
Okay. He could have, and this is kind of interesting, but I mean, he could have gone back and he could have told his servant, go back and read about this king. Or go back and tell me about this king and what happened while they were in the office. But who does he want to hear about? Himself. Yeah. Read my Chronicles. Let me hear some stories that are recorded about me and some things that happened and some accomplishments that I was able to do while I was in office. So it is kind of interesting that he chose the book to be read out of was his book. And of course, as the sermon is reading along here, question number 3, what does the king discover as the book is being read to him?
But the people that was planned to get him unearthed.
Yeah. So the story that the servant, I don't know if he picked the page or he picked the story, but the story that the servant reads to him is the story of Mordecai and how Mordecai had basically revealed an assassination attempt against the king. Now remember that if you turn back to chapter 2, turn back there real quickly, because this is actually documented in chapter 2. I told you when we were there to kind of try to remember that. I doubt that you were able to, but if you were, that's good. But I do want to bring it back up because it's an important part of this story. But if you go back to chapter 2 and start there in about verse 21, it says, in those days while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, I'm not going to try to pronounce their names, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Now, this is one of those head scratchers to me, because it clearly says that when Esther comes and reveals the plot, that she specifically mentions Mordecai's name. And Mordecai's name is etched down in the Chronicles of the King. He's given the credit for having revealed this assassination attempt, thwarted it basically, that was being planned against the king. But as you read through here, it evidently, was the king familiar with Mordecai? No, because what question does he ask?
What honor has been done for what Mordecai done?
Yeah, so it seems like to me, that if this guy, you knew this guy was out here and he was responsible for saving your life, it seems like me that you would have taken some steps to give him something honorable, wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't that make sense? And so he's reading along here, and he mentions the name Mordecai, and he said, well, what did we do for that guy? What did he get out of this for helping me out? And what was the answer? Not a thing. That wasn't the Persian system of reward and punishment, was it? I mean, if you stood up against the king, you got punished. If you helped the king, you were rewarded. And that was motivation to help the king. And so here's a guy who saved the king's life. What's been done for him? Ahasuerus or Xerxes says, well, nothing's been done for him. So it's highly unusual that he wouldn't have been rewarded in some way. And so the question to me becomes, why did he not get rewarded? I mean, the Bible doesn't answer that for us, right? But how is it that he was able to slip through the cracks in such an important matter and basically escape the attention of the king in the idea that he saved the king's life? I mean, that's highly unusual. And just happens at this point in this time, this is one of those, providence of God. Don't ever underestimate what God can do through ordinary events. Insomnia, reading of the Chronicles of the Kings, a narrow failure in that he's not rewarded Mordecai yet. Those aren't miraculous. Those are all just human events.
Well, the way it transpired, if I remember right, is Mordecai didn't tell the king.
Yeah.
He told Esther, and Esther's the one who told the king. So the king may have never even met Mordecai. Maybe that was kind of left out there when Esther told the king.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that we read in chapter 2, though, that kind of stood out to me in verse 22. And you're right that Esther did tell the king. It said the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. So she specifically mentioned Mordecai's name before the king, but somewhere in all the hustle and bustle, I don't know. He didn't get the honor and the recognition that he deserved for thwarting this plan that was upon the king's life. But all these things happen, and they're all come down to this point in time, and they all work together to accomplish God's purpose. Again, you have the hand of God in all these matters. So here is the king. He couldn't sleep. The Chronicles have been read to him. He discovers Mordecai. He says, what have we done to honor him? No honor has been bestowed upon him. The king is thinking, what can we do for this guy? There's got to be something really great that's done for him because he saved my life. He helped thwart that assassination attempt. So, meanwhile, Haman walks into the outer court of the king. Now, keep in mind, this has to be pretty early in the morning, doesn't it? You remember last week, what was Haman doing all night? Yeah, he comes home, he tells his family and his friends about Mordecai. What can I do? Just kill him. Have him hanged and make an example of him. And so, when everybody walks by and looks up and sees him hanging there, they'll say, well, what did he do? He didn't bow and pay honor to Haman, right? That's what happened to him. That's going to put fear into everybody. And so the Bible says that very night, he has these gallows constructed that are 75 feet tall. And so first thing in the morning, Haman sets out, he says, I'm going to get him. And so he enters into the outer court of the king to inquire about having Mordecai put to death. Obviously, for not honoring him is what he's hoping here, right? But it had to be pretty early in the morning. And I think Haman wanted to get this hanging done as fast as he could. Well, I say a hanging. You know, it's kind of, when you read about it in the translation, it kind of indicates a hanging. But the Persian way of killing people was literally impaling on a stick. And so that's what or a pole. And that's probably what the hanging, a lot of people might refer to. They'd let the body hang on that stick or that pole for a number of days. But it is kind of interesting. He comes in very early in the morning. I think he's thinking, I'm going to get this, as done as fast as I can. He's probably up all night helping supervise the construction of these gallows, making sure that everything was perfect. And then I think probably he thought, I'm going to get to spend all day admiring my handiwork. I'm going to get to spend all day staring at Mordecai the Jew up there impaled on a stick. And I can just see him, being so happy and so glad and just ready to get this thing going. So Haman walks into the outer court. King says, who's out there? They said, it's Haman. He said, well, tell him to come in. And question number 5 here, what advice does the king ask of Haman?
To do to honor the person.
Yeah. He basically, now remember, Haman is one of he's the top counselor. We just read about how he was promoted above all the servants and all the officials, but he's the top counselor and advisor to the king himself. And so the king says, come in here, I've got a question for you. He says, well, what do you think that I should do as a king to bestow honor upon a person? I want to honor a certain person. I want to recognize him. What do you think would be the best thing to do in that situation? Well, what immediately popped into Haman's mind? He's talking about me. There's his arrogance again, right? Who would the king want to honor more than me in all of his empire? And so, the wheels start turning up here and he's saying, what do I want? What do I want? And so the reply that he gives him is, well, I think probably what would be best is you let him wear a change of the king's clothing. Dress him up in royal clothing that the king himself has put on. Let him ride on a king's horse, those horses that have the king's crown on them, the really important ones. Put him on one of them, lead him throughout the city, have one of your top officials, escort him, lead kind of the parade throughout the city and cry out for everybody to show him honor and respect. And so the king, listened to what Haman had to say, and he said, well, that's a great idea. Go get Mordecai and do that for him. So that question number 6 here, because of his arrogance, and because he had this assumption that the person that the king was talking about, it led up to at least Haman feeling very humiliated by what he had to do. And so he had to go get Mordecai the Jew. Now remember, this was a guy who wouldn't bow down to him, right? This was a guy who wouldn't show him any honor or any respect or recognition. He had to go get him. He had to dress him in the king's clothing. He had to go get the king's horse out of the stable. He had to put Mordecai on that horse. And he had to lead him through the city, and he had to yell out to everybody, show honor and respect for this great person. So, that literally just made Haman sick. I mean, it killed him to have to do that, didn't it? And so what ends up happening? How does he feel about this? Question number 7. What does he do?
He runs home, start complaining to his wife.
Yeah. If you notice in verse 12 there, it said, Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. Why do you think he covered up his head? He didn't want anybody seeing it. That's right. And he knew for a fact that a lot of these people who saw him out there leading Mordecai around knew that Mordecai was the guy who wouldn't bow. He was the guy who wouldn't pay honor and respect to him. And now he's showing honor and respect to Mordecai in what he had to do. But it completely demoralized him, didn't it? Part of it was the fact that it was Mordecai. I think the other part was the fact that it was a Jew. We already talked a little bit about their relationship, or the rift in their relationship, a couple of lessons ago. So he put a head covering on. He acted like he was grieving for somebody who had died. And again, that's probably just to try to hide his identity. He didn't want anybody to recognize and start talking to him about that. Question number 8 here. So when he gets home, he talks to the wise men. He talks to his wife once again. How do they react to what happened?
They thought it would prevail. And, they were all aware of the providence of God back to Cyrus's edict when coming back to Jerusalem. So it seemed like those wise men were aware of the providence of God with the Jews.
Yeah. Yeah, they certainly, and I think this comes into play too. The Persians were, like a lot of these nations, they were a very superstitious people. And they kind of read this as, this is a bad omen. The fact that this happened, this was the guy that you wanted dead. He's a Jew. That it's not looking good for you. And this is a bad sign. And the fact that Mordecai had been so highly honored by the king, they basically told him, you put this plan into effect to kill all these Jews. And now you got this guy who's a Jew, who's highly honored by the king. You're not going to be able to keep your position for very long. And so basically, they probably told him in a nutshell, you're at high risk. Your time is limited. So when you get into chapter 7, we read about a couple of events coming together here to finish out the story for the night. Remember that Esther had approached the king, and the king basically said, I'll grant you, whatever you want. You just tell me what you need and I'll give it to you. And we talked about how Esther, she played him up quite a bit. She used her beauty. She used her charm. She said, I want you to come eat with me. I want you to have a meal with me. And then I'll tell you what I want from you, but I want to spend some time with you. And so she does that one night. The second night is when Esther finally reveals to the king what she wants. So question number 9 here, dealing with chapter 7. What did the king offer Esther at the banquet she prepared for him? How does he describe it? I know we talked about this last week.
Half his kingdom.
Yeah, up to half his kingdom. Anybody study that phrase, any? What do you think?
You said,
Don't quote me from your notes. What did I say?
King Herod.
Yeah, King Herod. You'll see it in the New Testament too, right? You think it was literal? You think it was kind of an idiom phrase which basically says, whatever I can do for you, I'll do for you. I think that's probably more, in my estimation, that's probably more of a proper explanation. That's one of the things you sometimes get into in translation. Those idioms in other languages are lost. And so you read something, take it literally, and you get off a little bit, but thankfully this doesn't matter a whole lot. But Basically, I think what he was telling her is, whatever you want, if I can do it for you, I'll do it. And this is the third time now that Xerxes has asked her to tell him what she wanted. You think he was in suspense a little bit? I don't know. I imagine he was probably thinking, what in the world does she want? You know, what's so important that we have to go through all of this for her to ask me what she wanted? But also remember this: she had literally risked her life to ask for it, hadn't she? And so he had to be thinking, this has got to be something pretty important. But I imagine the suspense was killing him. Probably about as much as Esther, and having to hold back from asking the question. So, question number 10 here: how does the queen present her request to Xerxes?
I found favor in sight. She starts out.
Yeah. What'd she ask for?
Her life.
Her life. Imagine that. I mean, I think the king was probably thinking she's probably could have asked for this, expensive material possession over here. Or maybe he was thinking she's going to ask me a permission, to travel or to take a trip or something like that. But when she comes before him, the only thing that she wants is her life. And she says, in order to spare my life, though, you're going to have to spare the life of my people. And so she kind of ties those two things together that are pretty important in what's going to transpire throughout the story. She also makes another can't even think of the word I'm trying to use here. She uses another way to kind of try to soften her request. She tells the king, if my life weren't at stake, if it was just a matter of me becoming a slave, I wouldn't even bother. You're important, you got too much stuff going on. But because it's my life, I had to ask. And so think about that. Here was a woman who was willing. She says, I'm not even going to trouble you if it just means me being a slave. But all those things are pretty important. The way she approaches him, the way she asks, all important to her request being granted here. But don't you think that had to be a shock to Xerxes? A shock that she's asking for her life. Because in essence, what she's saying is, somebody's trying to kill me. Somebody's trying to take my life. And Xerxes, who was this woman to Xerxes?
I was just going to comment that it seems as if the king, a lot of this stuff was going on and he wasn't aware of it. He didn't know, they were just doing it behind his back, basically.
Yeah.
Getting his approval, but not fully telling him what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of the fact is, too, nobody knows the heritage of Esther. Does anybody know she's a Jew yet? No. Remember, Mordecai had told her from her youth, keep that a secret. Don't go out here talking about your heritage and spreading that around. But I think Xerxes, again, this is the arrogant king standpoint. But how did Xerxes view his women?
They're lower class. They weren't all over that.
Yeah. Well, he definitely viewed them as lower class, but they were his. So if you're trying to kill Esther, what are you trying to kill? Well, you're attacking the king, right? Because you're trying to take something that belongs to him. So who in the world would try to kill my wife? The king's wife. Who would have the courage to try to accomplish something like that? But ends up revealing that, or Esther ends up revealing that Haman was the person behind this plot. And question number 12 here, what does the king do whenever he discovers the truth about Haman? Yeah. The Bible says he jumps to his feet in a rage. He rushes out to the palace garden. And I have no doubt, it probably had to come as a shock to him. Because, like Daryl said, it's pretty obvious when you read the account, he wasn't fully aware of all the things that were happening. This was a guy who he trusted, Haman, made him his top advisor and counselor. Should have asked a lot more questions, but he just trusted that this guy was looking out for his best interest. Haman wasn't. He was looking out for himself. That's what he was all about. But that probably had to be a shock to him, and also had to be a shock because he'd signed off on it. Right? He'd had the king's ring and seal was used on that royal decree that was sent throughout the kingdom.
And wasn't it the law or the custom that when a king decreed something, it couldn't be withdrawn?
Law of the Medes and Persians. Yeah. And we'll get it. We'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, that had to be going through his mind too, didn't it? The fact that he'd signed off on this decree, the Jews could be killed at a certain day. Anybody who was Jewish could be attacked and killed. You can take their stuff.
Esther was smart enough not to bring that up. She placed all the blame on Haman.
Yeah.
She didn't put any responsibility back on the king.
Yeah, that was pretty wise, wasn't it? She didn't blame the king for what happened. She blamed Haman. And, really, he was a lot to blame. He did do it in a very deceptive way and went about to try to accomplish that. But I think, you read about question 13, his reaction, whenever Esther talks about it. Haman could read the writing on the wall. This wasn't good for him, right? King's mad. He's furious. He's just made a decree that would allow somebody to kill his wife without any consequences. And so he knows he's not in a good situation. The only hope that he has is to plead with Esther to spare his life. And so a couple of things happen that kind of seal Haman's fate here. The king leaves the room, leaves Haman, and remember those were the only other two people in this dinner, leaves Haman and Esther in the room together. Royalty often reclined on a couch. That wasn't uncommon. Esther's reclining on her royal couch. Haman runs over, throws himself at her feet, begs for mercy. Well, a couple of no-nos here. First of all, Persian law, no one could approach any member of the king's, for lack of a better term, harem alone. You couldn't approach any of the king's women by yourself. Okay, if you approached any of the king's women, you had to have another person with you. Well, Haman's here by himself. He's approached the wife of the king. The other thing is this, even if you were in the presence of the king's women with another person, you were not supposed to be any closer than 7 steps, Persian law. You were closer than 7 steps, you'd be put to death. So the king walks in from the garden, here's Haman, and he's laying all over the queen. And so he says, he's trying to force herself on her. That's it. He's dead. And that was basically the sealing of his fate. There is some important information, though, that's offered by one of the king's eunuchs at this time. What's that?
Tell them about it.
Yeah, he said, hey, I know a place where you can put him to death. He just built this gallows over here. And he also revealed another important part. He said he was going to kill Mordecai on those gallows that he built over there. So you can imagine the fury that was added to the king, this guy that saved his life, and he just honored, he was going to put him to death. And it ended up, of course, Haman himself got killed on those gallows that he built to put Mordecai to death. Those are the ironic circumstances there in question 17. So, chapter 6, chapter 7, anybody got any thoughts, comments? Anything before we end?
Probably showed a little wisdom on the king's part when he learned all this. His first reaction was to walk away and get, I caught his, take a minute, get right there,
Yeah.
take a breather, sort of gather your thoughts instead of just saying,
That's usually a good practice when you're angry, isn't it? But yeah, he did. Well, I don't know. I don't know what his main purpose was. Maybe he was trying to think of the worst thing that he could do to him. But yeah, that is generally true. You know, when you're mad, and you walk away from a situation. That is the best thing that you can do at the present time. Anybody else?